So, wir starten. Herzlich willkommen zum Pressegespräch anlässlich des Ehrengasts der Frankfurter Buchmesse 2025, den Philippinen. Guten Morgen, Magandang Umaga. Schön, dass Sie heute alle da sind. Ich bin Ines Bachor, ich bin PR-Managerin bei der Frankfurter Buchmesse und werde Sie heute durch das Gespräch führen. Und ganz besonders herzlich begrüßen möchte ich zunächst Ihre Exzellenzen, die philippinische Botschafterin, Frau Natividad. Außerdem freuen wir uns, dass auch die Botschafterinnen aus Chile und Rumänien heute hier sind. Herzlich willkommen. Mit uns hier im Raum als Sprecherin vertreten sind außerdem Karina Bolasco, die Kuratorin und Leiterin des philippinischen Literaturprogramms, Juergen, Buchmessedirektor. Und ich freue mich ganz besonders, dass wir gleich zwei literarische Stimmen aus den Philippinen heute hier in Berlin zu Gast haben. Herzlich willkommen, a very warm welcome, Daryll Delgado und Ignacio. Schön, dass Sie heute da sind. Ja, ich habe nachgeschaut, es sind ungefähr 9.860 Kilometer von Berlin nach Manila, 16 Reisestunden. Und mit unserem Ehrengastprogramm der Frankfurter Buchmesse möchten wir diese Distanz ein klein wenig reduzieren. Wir freuen uns sehr darauf, es sind noch ein paar Monate, dass wir im Oktober in Frankfurt die Philippinen mit ihrer vielfältigen Literatur begrüßen können. Es geht um Bücher, um Übersetzungen, um Autorinnen und Autoren und auch darum, Verbindungen zu schaffen durch Geschichten und aber vor allem auch, was wir heute schon haben, durch Begegnungen mit Autorinnen und Verlegerinnen. Was erwartet Sie hier heute in der nächsten Stunde? Einerseits möchten wir Ihnen einen Vorgeschmack darauf geben, zunächst, was Sie schon kommende Woche in Leipzig auf der Buchmesse erwartet. Dafür müssen Sie nämlich auch nur 1,5 Stunden reisen. Und welche Bücher Sie schon mal lesen können, die neu in deutscher Übersetzung erschienen sind. Und dann werfen wir auch noch einen kleinen Blick auf Frankfurt, welche Autorinnen und Autoren Sie dort erwarten und treffen können. Im Gespräch im Anschluss geben dann Daryll Delgado und Ignacio Einblicke in ihre neuesten Werke und auch in die philippinische Literaturszene. Und wir haben natürlich auch noch ein bisschen Zeit eingeplant für Ihre Fragen an die Sprecherinnen und Sprecher am Ende. Etwas Organisatorisches. Ich glaube, die Kolleginnen und Kollegen haben Sie schon darauf hingewiesen, die Veranstaltung ist auf Deutsch und Englisch. Falls Sie eine Übersetzung benötigen, if you need a translation, es gibt Headsets vorne, die Kolleginnen geben Ihnen gerne noch eins. Wir zeichnen das Gespräch auf und Sie finden es auch im Anschluss auf dem YouTube-Kanal des philippinischen Ehrengasts. Und am Ende, deswegen verlassen Sie nicht den Raum direkt, gibt es sowohl ein kleines philippinisches Buffet mit Snacks hier um die Ecke, als auch ein Bücherbuffet, bei dem Sie, haben mir gerade noch mal die Kolleginnen und Kollegen gesagt, sehr herzlich eingeladen sind, sich 2 Bücher auszusuchen und mitzunehmen, als kleinen Vorgeschmack auf Oktober. Und nun übergebe ich an Juergen, den Direktor der Frankfurter Buchmesse. Bitte.
Vielen Dank, Ines. Es war selten so voll in diesem Raum. Das freut mich. Das ist schön. Ich hoffe, das ist nicht nur dem Bücherbuffet und dem Snack geschuldet, dass wir so viele sind. Wir hatten auch noch nie so eine hohe Botschafterinnendichte. Dann das freut mich natürlich sehr von Natividad, Frau Bolasco und Magdalena Adria. Schön, dass ihr mit dabei seid. Liebe Karina Bolasco, liebe Autorinnen, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Gäste, heute schlagen wir eine Brücke von den 7.641 Inseln der Philippinen. Ich frage mich immer, wer hat sich die Mühe gemacht, diese Inseln zu zählen? Who did ever count these islands? 7.641. But obviously, it's the way it is. Wir schlagen die Brücke von den Inseln der Philippinen nach Leipzig und weiter nach Frankfurt. Die Philippinen sind unser Ehrengast der Frankfurter Buchmesse 2025. Und mit dem ersten großen Auftritt auf der Leipziger Buchmesse nächste Woche beginnt eine literarische Reise. Für mich hat sie natürlich schon in der Vorbereitungszeit etwas früher begonnen und ich war auch sehr glücklich. Letzten Samstag gab es eine Ausstellungseröffnung in Heidelberg schon. Jeder Filipino hat einmal in seinem Leben nach Heidelberg zu fahren. Und ich glaube, über diese Geschichte müssen wir auch nochmal sprechen. I think every Filipino has to go once in his life to Heidelberg. And there's a reason behind it. And literature will help us to understand why you have to come to Heidelberg and why we Germans should be proud to have José Rizal in Heidelberg. Diese Reise wird uns die reiche, vielstimmige Tradition dieses Landes näher bringen. The imagination peoples the air. Fantasie beseelt die Luft. Dieses Motto trifft genau das, was philippinische Literatur ausmacht. Sie ist durchdrungen von Erzähltraditionen, die über Jahrhunderte hinweg mündlich weitergegeben wurden. Sie trägt die Spuren einer kolonialen Vergangenheit und gleichzeitig eine eigenständige, realistische, rebellische Vorstellungskraft. Sie wechselt mühelos zwischen Englisch, Filipino, Tagalog, Dutzenden weiteren Sprachen, eine Mehrstimmigkeit, die einzigartig ist. Nach Indonesien im Jahr 2015 sind die Philippinen jetzt das zweite südostasiatische Gastland der Frankfurter Buchmesse. So ein Ehrengastauftritt fördert nicht nur kulturelle, sondern auch wirtschaftliche Verbindungen. Übersetzungen, Lizenzgeschäfte und neue Verlagskontakte tragen dazu bei, dass die Literatur eines Landes international gehört wird. Also nicht nur in Deutschland. Die Frankfurter Buchmesse ist die internationalste Buchmesse der Welt. Wir haben Fachbesucher aus 140 Ländern, die nach Frankfurt kommen. Ich glaube, fast 70% aller Artikel, die über die 5 Tage geschrieben werden, beschäftigen sich mit dem Ehrengast. Also das ist auch der wichtigste Anlass, den wir haben. Die Frankfurter Buchmesse war schon immer ein Ort, an dem Geschichten nicht nur erzählt, sondern auch in die Welt hinausgetragen werden. Und heute haben wir die Ehre, 2 herausragende Stimmen der philippinischen Gegenwartsliteratur kennenzulernen. Daryll Delgado erzählt in Überreste von den Spuren, die Gewalt und Erinnerung hinterlassen. Eine Geschichte, die im Kontext der Klimakatastrophe tief in die Historie des Landes eintaucht und doch universelle Fragen aufwirft. J. Philipp Ignacio hingegen entführt uns mit Alandal in die Welt der Graphic Novel, ein Genre, das auf den Philippinen eine lange Tradition hat. In seinen Bildern und Texten verschmelzen Geschichte und Gegenwart. Dabei setzt er kühne, poetische Akzente in der Auseinandersetzung mit dem spanischen Kolonialismus. Und Leipzig gibt nächste Woche den Auftakt für weitere literarische Entdeckungen. Ich danke allen Beteiligten, die diese Reise möglich machen, den Verlagen, Übersetzerinnen und Autorinnen und natürlich den Initiatorinnen und Organisatorinnen des Ehrengastprogramms. Ich freue mich sehr auf die Gespräche heute und auf alles, was noch kommen mag. Vielen Dank.
Vielen Dank, Juergen Boos. Und als nächstes möchte ich dann gerne Ihre Exzellenz, die philippinische Botschafterin, ans Rednerpult bitten. Bitte.
Guten Morgen allerseits. Good morning, friends. Let me start by thanking Juergen Boos and his team at the Frankfurter Buchmesse for welcoming us to the Berlin office this morning and for hosting this press talk. And thank you to all of you for coming and joining us today in spite of the transport strike. For the Philippines, a country of 7,641 islands, our selection as this year's guest of honor at the Frankfurter Buchmesse is a cause for celebration. But this celebration comes with a sense of responsibility. Our responsibility to bring our stories, the issues that shape us, and our perspectives into a global conversation. Literature is reflective of who we are, of what we stand for, of what we want to achieve or change. The questions that move us, the struggles of identity, the weight of history, the pursuit of justice, are questions that matter to us Filipinos and to the world. By bringing our authors, our ideas, and our lived experiences before a wider audience, we hope to engage, to push for deeper understanding, and encourage new ways of thinking. The 35,000 Filipinos living here in Germany and that number is double if you count those who count themselves as Germans now, are part of our story. They carry with them not just the resilience and excellence of our people, but the narratives of migration, of sacrifice, of hope. Their stories should not sit idle on our bookshelves. Their stories are meant to be shared. Their stories provoke, inspire, empower, and invite reflection and discussions from readers everywhere. The Philippine Pavilion in Frankfurt will be filled with our stories as a nation and as a people under the theme, "The Imagination Peoples the Air." We invite you to be our partners in ensuring that the voices of Filipinos are heard, and they are as many, as beautiful, and as diverse as our 7,641 islands. Let us now listen to a message from the visionary and driving force behind the Philippine participation at the Frankfurter Buchmesse and our selection as guests of honor country for this year's book fair, the Honorable Senator Loren Legarda.
Exactly a decade ago, in 2015, the Philippines made its return to the Frankfurt Book Fair after a 15-year absence since its last participation in year 2000. It was a modest stand for a culturally rich nation. In the year we made our comeback, we had already set our sights on our major goal to be the guest of honor country at the world's largest book fair. The Philippines, an archipelagic nation in Southeast Asia, is a confluence of historical, ecological, and cultural narratives that have shaped its distinct literary tradition. As a country comprising 7,641 islands and a population projected in 2025 to be at 113 million, alongside a diaspora of over 10 million, its literature emerges from a complex interplay of indigenous knowledge systems, colonial legacies, and global exchanges. Positioned within the Coral Triangle, the world's epicenter of marine biodiversity, the Philippines boasts a rich natural environment that has profoundly informed its literary and artistic expressions. This ecological wealth, coupled with a history of trade, migration, and colonization, has resulted in a literary tradition that navigates themes of identity, resilience, and transformation. Beyond geography, our heritage is woven from at least 135 ethno-linguistic groups, each contributing to an evolving, multi-layered cultural identity. The Philippines' colonial history, spanning over 300 years, has offered further complexity to this identity, leading to literary expressions deeply engaged with world literature, post-colonial discourse, and decolonial perspectives. Our writers have skillfully translated historical and cultural forms into narratives that are uniquely Filipino yet globally resonant. This literary imagination continues to flourish as we bring our voices to the world stage. The Frankfurt Book Fair and, for the first time, the Leipzig Book Fair offer invaluable platforms for showcasing our stories to the world. It is quite ironic for a nation whose independence was inspired by books to be late at the world's oldest book fair. We waited 100 years after our freedom from colonial rule to participate in the FBM. In 1998, in our inaugural FBM participation, 45 publishers displayed 302 book titles under the theme Centennial of the Philippine Independence on a stand that was only 8 square meters. As a 4-term Senator, I am fully aware of the importance of reading in enriching the mind, especially in enhancing critical thinking. As such, when Karina Bolasco, who was then among the board members of the National Book Development Board, reached out to me for support to be able to participate in the 2015 FBM, I was eager to find a solution. In 2016, we were able to provide support for a Philippine stand, albeit small. In the year 2017, I met with FBM officials led by Mr. Juergen when they visited Manila. I informed them that we were keen to be the guest of honor country. In the same year, the National Book Development Board formalized it through a letter of intent. We did all the necessary preparations to ensure that our bid will be accepted, and while the pandemic affected the timelines, we did not put our dreams on hold until the Philippines' guest of honor role was approved and formalized in 2023. A decade after its sustained participation, the Philippines is now at the center of the Frankfurt Book Fair, a very powerful stage. Government funding, institutional support, policy initiatives are crucial in ensuring that Philippine literature continues to flourish, not just at the Frankfurt Book Fair and other international literary events, but in all avenues where our stories deserve to be heard. Sustained investment in the art world and creative sphere are both essential, as literature is not merely an artistic pursuit, but a vital force in cultural diplomacy, national identity, and global dialogue. Germany is also the fitting stage to unfold Philippine literature's finest. After all, Germany has always been a gracious host of Philippine literature. From that time of our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal, to the present, Germany has played a vital role in our literary and historical journey, providing a space where our stories, envisioned and told, can be shared with the world. This country holds a precious place in Philippine history, deeply intertwined with Rizal's life and work. Heidelberg had always captivated him that he dedicated a poem to it. Wilhelmsfeld, where he lived in the vicarage of Pastor Karl Ulmer, and in Berlin, where his most important work, Noli Me Tangere, was first published. This novel stirred the hearts of the colonized Filipinos that it ignited a revolution, which led to our inevitable independence. As we take our place as guest of honor for the FBM 2025, we come full circle, honoring a literary legacy that began with Dr. Jose Rizal. Fittingly, we have chosen the theme, "The Imagination Peoples the Air," a line from his Noli Me Tangere, reflecting the boundless creativity and enduring spirit of Philippine literature. We hope that this central role would open the floodgates for more Filipino authors, translators, artists, and publishers to present our literary wealth. While we acknowledge that English, being one of the two official languages in the Philippines, the other is Filipino, gives our literature an advantage in presenting to a global audience, we recognize it is not enough if we aim for a distinct cultural voice to be heard by everyone. Thus, to complement our important role at the 2025 FBM, we enhanced our translation subsidy program under the NBDB, ensuring that more Philippine books can be accessed by a wider audience. Some of these books will have German editions available at Leipzig and more at Frankfurt. This undertaking would not have been possible without the collaboration among the Philippine government agencies involved: the National Book Development Board, the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, NCCA, the Department of Foreign Affairs, the DFA, and my office in the Senate, together with the support from the Frankfurter Buchmesse led by Juergen. We've also prepared other events as part of our Guest of Honor program. Aside from our first ever participation in the Leipzig Book Fair, we've launched last March 15 an exhibition at a Heidelberger Kunstverein titled Oculus, featuring a collaboration between Filipino visual artist Stephanie Misa and German artist Joshua Steffens. The exhibit was curated by Dr. Patrick Flores, who is also the curator of the Philippines Guest of Honor Pavilion. Several other activities are being prepared, the details of which we will share with you in due time in person and in our website. I also invite you to follow our social media channels where we continue to share original content that brings our stories to life. Finally, I would like to thank the German media for your support in all that we do. We are very much grateful and look forward to further partnerships with all of you. From Rizal's Berlin to Frankfurt's Grand Halls, the Philippine story continues, written in ink, lived in memory, and now voiced on the world's largest literary stage. What began as a dream, nurtured by a decade of dedication, has become a defining moment in our literary journey. Yet this is not the final chapter. It is merely a powerful prelude. For literature does not flourish in isolation. It thrives in the embrace of a nation that values its storytellers, in the steadfast support of a government that understands that words are not just vessels, but bridges of diplomacy, shared humanity, and identity. Vielen Dank, and see you in more of our programs in the Philippine Pavilion in the Frankfurt Book Fair.
An Ihre Exzellenz die Botschafterin, und wir senden Grüße auf die Philippinen. Und nun möchte ich gerne Karina Bolasco, die Kuratorin und Leiterin des philippinischen Literaturprogramms, nach vorne bitten, die einen Einblick in die philippinische Literaturlandschaft und einen Blick nach Leipzig werfen wird. Bitte schön.
Thank you. Guten Morgen. Philippine literature, like anything that is ours today, is a casualty of history of almost 4 centuries of colonial imperial rule. It is a uniquely Filipino mesh of cultures, indigenous and Southeast Asian, overlain with European Old World, with modern American education, and expressed in the clear, undeniable voice of the young and the contemporary of our world today. Our stories are distinctive and diverse, expressed in 135 languages, told and retold in many voices, from a wide range of perspectives, and always conflicted between submission and resistance, between silence and protest. As packed and as rich as this history, it pulsates with its epics, myths, legends, the cenaculo and the zarzuela, which are theater forms, the poetic forms and joust, and all the stories that have survived systematic and unrelenting colonial repression. They have been passed on from generation to generation by word of mouth, by song and chant, and by printer's ink, and have continued to influence and shape to some degree or another contemporary writing in all its new and varied forms. Whether they're aware of this legacy or not, more than half of our population are young people who, with such fresh energy, create stories in new forms as speculative fiction, climate fiction, avant-garde children's and young adult, graphic novels, and comics, and new adult and romance. The Filipino literary landscape is vibrant with book launches, readings, and signings, writing workshops, literary contests, and book awards, fairs, and festivals. Indie presses are making a mark for themselves, and winning awards and prizes for their books. Regional indie presses like Historia Studios and Bookshop, Savage Mind, Kasing-Kasing Press, and Aklat Alamid are now fixtures in their localities. They publish some of their titles in their local languages, and more of them are emerging. In 2024, the number of books we released increased by 26% from the previous year. We produced about 13,018 titles. Production is across genres: children's books, crime fiction, romance in English and Filipino, graphic novels and comics, academic and scholarly, biographies and memoirs, and poetry and fiction. There is a robust network of distribution and purchase points, making sure books reach readers. The biggest boost that came with the pandemic was online stores, like Shopee and Lazada, that included books in their product range. Without the huge commission brick and mortar stores ask for, some publishers have been doubling, even tripling their sales. The road to guest of honor, actually the story has been told by the senator, but I always refer to it as short and sweet. Not in the way we know short and sweet to mean. Short, as unlike other countries, we were given only 2 years and 2 months to prepare. Sweet is the backstory, as you heard from the senator, because our book industry would not have dreamt of it until our good senator, who back home is a known fierce and relentless advocate for arts, culture, and the environment, saw what we didn't see as a book industry. That this was a one-time, big-time opportunity for our book industry to showcase on the international stage our best books in the last 100 years. Not only those that will or could sell rights, but also those that represent us and make us more understandable to other peoples and the world. The imagination peoples the air. Our guest of honor theme is taken, as has been mentioned, from Jose Rizal's Noli Me Tangere, which is our very first book connection to Germany. The novel was printed in Berlin in 1887 by an all-women press. As Patrick Flores, our Pavilion curator, would have said it himself if he were here, and I quote, "The poetry here evokes the power of the book as the source of imagination and speculation. Nature and history, ethos and ecology come together beautifully, for at the heart of books is the promise of sharing, a collective aspiration to be present in the world of stories, ideas, myths, fantasies, and the future. The Guest of Honor Pavilion, therefore, will be the space, the climate for sharing, democratic, deliberative, daring, convivial, peopled by imagination, prompted to action by speculation," close quotes. Translation could be a twin theme. It actually is the base or underlying theme, as it is a consequence of colonial goals. For Spain to Christianize a subject nation like the Philippines and deepen its hold on it, Spanish friars, instead of teaching the subject people the new language, they learned Tagalog to effectively spread the Catholic doctrine. There was an army of translators for conversion they were called Ladinos. These were natives who learned Spanish and helped the Spanish friars preach in Tagalog. No surprise then that the first printed book, Doctrina Christiana, which came out in 1593, is a translation to Filipino of Catholic precepts and basic prayers in Spanish. It was printed in Tagalog, which was Romanized, and in the Baybayin script, which was an old Indic-based writing system that predates Spanish colonization. Entangled in our colonial heap of indigenous Spanish, American, and global influences, our story of translation is a fascinating one. What would liberate us from the capture of early translations of religious texts by Spanish missionaries and the Ladinos are two subversive texts or anti-friar novels by our foremost hero, Jose Rizal, which, ironically, would also come to us in translation. In fact, Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo, originally written in Spanish, are the two most translated works ever. From the very first, which was to French in 1899, to the most recent, to Portuguese in 2023. In between are many versions of English and Filipino and other Philippine languages, as once encouraged by our National Historical Commission. When the Noli turned 100 years old in 1997, they held a contest to translate it in the major Philippine languages. It is the same ironic story with English, that the Americans systematically and massively taught us through the public educational system. For a long time, it bullied out all other foreign languages and our very own languages, and lately made us think there was no other language we needed. We didn't need to translate, we had English. It was all that was required to progress in education and publication in life. I'm sweating the heat. Until the Filipino paperback, first romances, then became nonfiction and fiction, became runaway bestsellers. We finally were recovering our taste, our tongue for our own. Truly, for a country that speaks many languages, translation is a lifeline. As our national artist for literature, Resil Mojares, says, any literary text is a point of entry into the historical world. Therefore, to enter it and make it cross over to the heartland of another language is to expand the borders of compassion and understanding between cultures. Words that experience another culture electrify a language, and it is this energy that gives it strength and ultimately its meaning. This takes me now to the history of translation between our countries, which began with the accounts of two early explorers, William Dampier, a navigator, and Antonio Pigafetta, a scholar and chronicler. Translations of their accounts of their exploits, published in the 18th to the early 20th centuries, have given German readers stories of the voyages that shaped global exploration and the Philippines' place in the history. Dampier's A New Voyage Round the World was released in Leipzig in 1702, while Pigafetta's Relazione del primo viaggio intorno al mondo came out in German in 1750. As the 20th century progressed, there was also interest in Philippine literature among the Germans in 1946 after the Second World War, and in 1986 after the EDSA People Power deposed then dictator Ferdinand Marcos Sr. Examples are translations of Jose Maria Sison's Philippine Society and Revolution, and in Epifanio San Juan's Racism and the Diaspora, the Filipino Diaspora. Both books were put out by Regio Spectra Verlag. Notable other works translated to German, aside from Rizal's novels, are by Ninochka Roska, A State of War, translated into German by Hoffmann and Campe in 1990. Miguel Sijuco's Ilustrado, released by Clerk Cota in 2011. And Francisco Sionil Jose's Gagamba was put out by Horleman Berlin, as it was called The Spider-Man, in 2015. In 2022, as we geared up for our role of guest of honor, the National Book Development Board worked with LitProm. I guess most of you are familiar with LitProm. It's a professional organization attached to the Frankfurt Book Fair that helps promote works from other parts of the world to a German audience. So They put out a catalog called Moderni Literatur on den Philippinen, where they selected 11 Philippine works from a longer list we submitted. And among them are themes of Filipino dynamics, emotional toll of overseas employment, feudalism and corruption, and the aftermath of a climate disaster. In 2024, the collaboration was extended to bring 20 more Philippine titles to the German book market. So the second Lit Prom catalog featured a diverse collection of novels, short story collections, a thematic anthology, a young adult novel, and a graphic novel. This range showcases a variety of literary styles, all addressing universal themes and hopefully resonant with other issues in the world. But the biggest push to the translations was, of course, the National Book Board's translation subsidy program. It reinforced and offered in more cycles than the usual for the guest of honor role. In the last year alone, the program has funded 129 translations. Here are some of the German editions, and 12 of these will be available at the Leipzig Book Fair at the end of the month. We will debut there, our first time to participate in the Leipzig Buchmesse, which is supposed to be the biggest literary festival. We are told that the city itself turns into a whole literary festival. We are bringing 9 authors. 2 of them are with us here, Daryll and Jay. And we will be featured in 10 events on stages at the Buchmesse and the University of Lancaster. The lineup of authors and the program of events are all uploaded on the LBM dashboard and also are in your press kit. So is the list of the delegation of authors and artists who will be with us at the Frankfurt Book Fair. Okay. Parallel to the book events, I think Juergen mentioned it, which kicked off the entire program for this year, was the Oculus in Heidelberg. It's an exhibition and a cultural program of the guest of honor Frankfurt Book Fair at the Kunstverein, Heidelberger Kunstverein. It features the works of the Filipina Stephanie Misa and the German Joscha Steffens, curated by Patrick Flores. We invite you to join us again at our June 26 press conference at the Evangelische Akademie, Frankfurt. Translation has not only facilitated the spread of Christianity and Western education, but has also allowed Filipino writers and thinkers to engage with global ideas while preserving their own cultural identity. Translation privileges our stories, brings them to where we can all sit around a fire and understand one another with warmth and in that light. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Karina Bolasco, für die Einblicke in die philippinische Literaturlandschaft und die Informationen zu Leipzig und Frankfurt. Werfen Sie einen Blick in die Pressemappe, die ersten Autorinnen und Autorennamen von denjenigen, die nach Frankfurt reisen, unter anderem auch die Friedensnobelpreisträgerin Maria Ressa, Patricia Evangelista, Rosi Dalisay und viele, viele ganz tolle weitere Autorinnen und Autoren sind dabei. Wir freuen uns schon sehr. Und um Autorinnen und Autoren soll es auch jetzt gehen. Und zwar möchte ich gerne nach vorne bitten, einmal Daryll Delgado. Sie studierte Journalismus und ist Autorin des bereits erwähnten Romans Remains auf Deutsch, gerade letzte Woche ganz druckfrisch erschienen, Überreste, übersetzt von Gabriele Heefs und im Grüner Verlag erschienen. Delgado war Finalistin des philippinischen National Book Awards für den besten Roman auf Englisch und auch des Madrigal González First Book Award. Außerdem ist sie mit einem weiteren Werk Gewinnerin des Philippine National Book Awards für das beste Buch in der Kategorie Short Fiction. Und derzeit arbeitet sie bei einer internationalen NGO und beschäftigt sich dabei unter anderem auch mit Themen, die von Arbeitsmigration, Arbeitsrecht und Rolle der Frauen handeln. Und in ihrem neuesten Roman Überreste kehrt die Protagonistin Anne nach dem Taifun Haiyan, international besser bekannt als Taifun Yolanda, 2013 war das, in die philippinische Stadt Tacloban zurück, um dort an einem NGO-Projekt zu arbeiten. Und in der zerstörten Stadt wird sie dann mit ihrer persönlichen Geschichte, aber eben auch den Geschichten von verschiedenen Überlebenden dort konfrontiert. Also es geht viel um Verlust und Widerstandsfähigkeit in diesem Roman. Außerdem heute auch mit uns hier im Raum J. Philip Ignacio. Er ist unter anderem auch Musiker, Schauspieler, Dokumentarfilmer und war im Impro-Theater aktiv auf den Philippinen. Er ist Mitbegründer von Third World Improv, der ersten Improvisationstheaterschule auf den Philippinen. Und seine Graphic Novel Alandal wurde mit dem National Book Award und dem National Children's Book Award ausgezeichnet. Die deutsche Ausgabe, das ist sozusagen die erste Edition von einer Serie, Alandal 1, ist im Dantes Verlag erschienen und wurde von Jens Nielsen übersetzt. Und die Graphic Novel spielt in einer Zeit Ende des 18. Jahrhunderts auf den Philippinen, wo die Protagonistin Sabina, die 12-jährige Tochter eines spanischen Konquistadors im Exil von Piraten entführt wird und auf eine andere Insel gebracht wird. Dort findet sie dann ihre wahre Identität als Enkelin eines Sultans heraus und trifft auf den Schwertkämpfer Alandal, der auch Namensgeber für diese Graphic Novel war. Juergen Boos wird mit den beiden Autoren ein Gespräch führen und ich möchte jetzt alle nach vorne bitten. Please.
It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
Because it's not about us, it's about you, it's about the authors. And we talked a lot this morning about diversity, Karina, you mentioned it. Mrs. Ambassador, you talked about Ambassador. We spoke about the impacts of colonialism. And I think it was very important what you said earlier, that the narrative, the storytelling is part of the identity. And even having, what was it, 400 years of Spanish occupation?
330 years.
We have to be very correct, yeah, 330.
50 years of America.
And 50 years American, and in between some Japanese soldiers in Chinese and Dutch, everybody was there. But still, it's 135 languages, which I've never seen before, so many languages. And what I also never heard of, actually, is climate fiction. I think this is a new genre for me. Yeah, so this is quite important. You have to tell us a bit about it. And we've learned about your background from Ines, and as a journalist, and now you're sitting in front of journalists. Are you on a mission somehow?
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for that question, and thank you for reminding me that I do have a journalism background, because sometimes I forget. But being reminded that I have a journalism background also reminds me that the work that I do is nothing compared to what brave journalists are doing out there. And it's important to me that I remind myself through my book and through my work about the importance of journalism, not just to me, but to literature, and how my own book owes a lot to journalism. And I think, even the word or the phrase climate fiction, I think it came from journalists and not literary workers and not writers first. And there must be a reason why they came up with the phrase climate fiction. I did not deliberately set out to write a work of climate fiction. I just wanted to tell a story, and I wanted to use whatever journalism background and creative writing background I had to tell, a story that people might be interested in.
What I also liked about the book, and as you said, I was lucky to get a pre-copy. Yeah, the book is only available for a few days now here in Germany, and I think you have very good translators, by the way. Yeah, so this is
Thank you. I'm very lucky.
Very important. And when we mentioned, I always like this phrase I heard a few weeks ago: the translators are ambassadors of diversity. Yeah, which brings us back to diversity. But again, the book starts off with a vivid description of the smell of do not, of decay, Verwesung. So olfaction, der Geruch spielt eine große Rolle. It plays a pivotal role in triggering memory and trauma. Yeah? So you're using, on the one hand, you're using interviews as a journalist, which is your background. And on the other hand, this is sort of a semiotic thing, yeah, to use this taste as well. Where did this come from?
I think it came from a couple of things. First of all, smell was the one sensory experience that first hit me when I went home to Tacloban, where I grew up, like 5 or 6 days after the super typhoon made landfall. And it was just so overwhelming. And it was something that you could not close your senses to. I mean, you could close your eyes to the visuals, you could cover your ears, right, to the sound or to the silence, but there was no way of dealing with the smell. And to me, that was very powerful. It was something that stayed with me after, weeks even. But also I wanted to give myself a challenge in writing. It's just so much more exciting, so much more interesting to describe smell or olfaction or your olfactory senses. And then I realized as I was writing my book that it's also a metaphor, a good metaphor for things that are so pervasive, but things that, seep into your skin, into your life, but you have no control over, that you just have to live with. And, I realized that the book, of course, when you read it, I hope you will understand that it's also talking about things that are so systemic and things that are seemingly made natural but are not natural. They're made natural because of power structures, because of history and, colonization and actions that individuals take. So I wanted to play with that kind of metaphor as well in the book.
Yeah, I like this idea very much because I just thought about it. I've been traveling a bit in the Philippines, and when you come to Manila, it smells completely different than Davao. Yeah, and I don't know, is it about the food where this comes? Yeah, but we'll have this experience with the food later on, so we can try to find out where the food comes from, which region. But then again, I like this idea that you have these multi-layered things. Yeah, that you have these interview situations. Then you have the olfaction thing, which is another layer of diversity comes in. But again, we heard about the 135 languages. You're using these different languages and also regional dialects. Yeah, it's all interwoven in your book. But how do you get through this? How do you navigate, actually?
Yes, again, that was a challenge that I wanted to give myself. But also, in reality, that's how Filipinos speak and interact with each other. It's never with just the one language. And even I was also toying with the notion of writing a Philippine language, but writing also in translation and writing it as though it were a foreign language because of our language diversity. It was really important for me to kind of force readers to read words that they're not familiar with, to force them to listen to voices that they don't normally hear, and also to force them to acknowledge that these voices, these words, these languages, these vocabularies exist because the book is about asking and exploring the question of who gets to tell their story and in what way should, the story be told? Who gives people the right, over who can speak and who cannot? So the language itself is already an issue, but it's also a metaphor in the book. And I hope, again, that's something that people will identify with. Thank you.
Yeah, this must have been quite a challenge for your translator again. So you have to translate, yeah? You have to bring the voices together. And then the German translator, I have to ask Karina, this must be an issue, yeah? 135 languages. So you have to translate from one language into another in the Philippines. Then probably most of it gets translated into English, and then from English it goes into other languages, because how many translators would we have from Tagalog into German? I wouldn't dare to think. 2? Yeah? Yeah? Just 1, yeah? And for the other languages, it must be even more difficult.
I mean, that's why I really appreciate the time, the effort that the NBDB, the Philippine government, and my translators took to work on the book. It was an interesting process, and I really appreciated how they involved me in the process. Every now and then they would consult me and ask me to clarify, give them more insight on the use of a particular word, and even the use of some idiomatic phrases in English, because Filipinos use English in a very specific way as well. So it was a fun process for me, but I'm sure it was difficult for the translators.
I really do believe you have to admire translators, what they are doing. And I don't think artificial intelligence will ever be able to understand what's happening. I just had to mention it. No discussion without artificial intelligence nowadays. But one last question, Daryll. You work for an NGO. You seem to be quite a political person. Yeah? When you write your book, you think you can change the world by writing? It's an evil question. I'm sorry for that.
I don't think there is any one book that can change the world. I mean, Jose Rizal wrote 2 books and then he had to die for things to change, right? I want writers to live, to tell the tale. For me, that's really important, that people are able to live and people are allowed to tell their stories. And that's why, being reminded of the work of journalists, for me, is very moving, because I feel very small, to be honest. I feel very insignificant when I am reminded of the work that very brave people are doing out there. And that's why I don't think I try to be political or apolitical. I just am. And I think any writer, all writers are political, all writers have politics. I don't have any illusions that my book will change the world or will influence policy making or what have you, but I have hopes, and I dream, like any writer, to be read by as many people as possible, and for the book to encourage people to ask questions. I think that's what I want to do, really, to help people ask questions.
Maybe it really was a stupid question, but I loved your answer. Yeah, because writers have to live, yeah. And that's an important, and you can choose many lives, but you have to look into many lives before, and that you can do by reading. Yeah, so I think reading novels, poems, open up new worlds. Yeah, and this is what you're doing. Thank you for that. Yeah, Jay, you're using words, but also graphics, for your work. You've chosen to look back in history. And I think your book came from a film documentary, which you've been doing. Maybe you can elaborate a bit about that as well.
Okay. Alandal was born out of the research that I did for a documentary film that I produced in 2013. There were accounts of... so the documentary film that I made is about the history and culture of the Filipino martial arts. What we call arnis. Some call eskrima or kali. There are historical accounts of within the Christianized Visayan Islands in the 1600s, of frequently encountering raids from certain Bangsamoro tribes in Sulu. So these are the pirates of the Sulu Sea who would frequently raid the Visayan Islands. And the martial art practiced by the Bangsamoro people is known as silat, which is a combination of Chinese Kung Fu because of their contact with Chinese traders, and also their indigenous fighting styles. And my imagination was triggered just by the thought of a small army of silat fighting raiders encountering a militia of Visayans who, together with their indigenous sword fighting knowledge, also were trained in a Spanish-style militia to respond to these raids. So I was just imagining these scenes, and out of that, I created this fiction that became Alandal.
For me, it was also quite an experience to browse, to read through the book. Yeah, it's black and white. Yeah, which is also some of the nicest people I met in my life are coming from the Philippines. And on the other hand, you're such big fighters. How does this go together? The black and white, the both sides of your people.
I think when you know that you have the power to destroy, you have the power to create. And the discipline of knowing what you are capable of is what makes you a better human being.
This is very philosophical.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what I also found out, the graphic novel takes place on the island of Mindanao. Yeah, and there's a very strong oral tradition.
Yes.
Yeah, so you have to listen to many stories. And are these part of your narrative or your narration in here? These oral stories? Is there a tradition where you come from?
I wrote this story coming from the martial arts history perspective. So I did not use any of the traditional stories of the people of Sulu and Mindanao. I think their stories are best told by them. Whereas I, as a tourist of history, I still consider myself a tourist because I'm no expert. I'm just insufferably curious. So this fiction was created outside of the tradition of storytelling of Mindanao and Sulu. This is a fiction that wrote itself in my head when I was producing that martial arts documentary.
Yeah. I like this tourist of history. Yeah, this fits perfectly what you said about the writer has to live. Yeah, so you can experience many different things. But you had the illustrator Alex Nino working with you,
Yes.
and I think I read in the book you had to go to California to meet him. He's not living in the Philippines, or?
Yes, Alex Nino lives in California, somewhere north of Los Angeles. He and I worked together on a short story. I wrote a short story, and he illustrated 12 scenes from that story. So it just so happened that I was in the U.S. on business, and I went there to pick up the original artwork for that short story. And it was at that moment when I told him, I have this idea for a comic book. So I told him what you see in the first few pages here is the prologue. That's all I had in my head. There's no real story yet. But he was listening to me intently. And after that informal pitch, he said, "Okay, let's do your comic book while I'm still alive."
He's in his 80s, yeah?
And now he's turning 85
Yeah.
in May.
But you're planning a second volume, aren't you?
Well, I have a second volume, but Alex Nino said that this is his final
Yeah.
his retirement piece. I basically pulled him out of retirement to make a retirement piece.
But this is wonderful. And I also read that he just wanted a storyline. He didn't want. Oh, am I getting too? Yeah, I speed up. No, just two last questions because I'm really interested in that.
Okay.
He just needed a storyline. Weren't you scared to hell what you would get as a result, since he didn't have the whole text, nothing?
I was told that this method of working where the writer basically just gives a synopsis to the artist and the artist has total reign over the visuals. I was told that that was the way Stan Lee worked with his co-creators. So it was called the Marvel style. I didn't know that at the time. But when he gave me those conditions that he would have 100% autonomy over the visuals, I understood this is where my improvisational training kicked in, where I offered him a synopsis, he agrees and reacts to it, and then offers me something back to which I will agree and react, and that's the process.
Jay, what's next for you? You work in so many different fields.
I have 3 new stories coming up.
As graphic novels?
As graphic novels, yes.
Okay, excellent.
Yes.
So I hope we get them soon here in Germany as well.
Yes, yes.
Just one last question. Ines is pushing me, I can tell. And maybe she's waiting for the food, I don't know. It's a question for both of you. What makes Filipino literature, graphic novels, whatever, unique? Why does the world have to look into it?
Uniqueness in literature will come from the perspective of the author. We can write romance stories, we can write historical fiction, we can write historical biographies and such, but the perspective of the author is what affects the entire piece.
So it's not being Filipino, but it's being a thinking person in the Philippines.
And you just happen to be Filipino.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. What's your perspective on that?
He just stole my answer, but okay, I want to say that first of all, my book and Jay's book, they're not representative. I don't think I can claim to be representative of Philippine literature, as Karina has shown you earlier. The literature and the people, the voices, the languages are so diverse, and I think it's that diversity that makes us different, that makes us unique. But and also because we are a product of our history and our current situation. And I think any book that comes out of a situation or an environment like that will always be unique. But also because I'm apparently writing climate fiction, and climate is such a it's a global issue. Fiction coming from countries like ours become a way for local peoples to be part of a global conversation. And I think the uniqueness of the local people's voices is important not only for producing literature, but for contributing to a very important conversation. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much. All what's left for me is to get your signings in my books. I really admire your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.